The evening sun dipped low on the horizon, streaking the sky with hues of fiery orange and deep indigo. I stood on the deck of the SS Eastland, the gentle hum of the engines vibrating through my boots. The air smelled faintly of lake water and coal smoke, a scent that brought with it a strange mix of unease and nostalgia. It was July 24th, 1915, and we were docked in Chicago, preparing to ferry employees of the Western Electric Company and their families across Lake Michigan for a long-anticipated picnic. Passengers bustled about the deck, their laughter and chatter creating a lively symphony. I watched as families posed for photographs, women in wide-brimmed hats and men in sharp suits, children clutching balloons. The Eastland was a marvel of modern engineering, or so the brochures claimed. Yet, as the ship swayed ever so slightly beneath my feet, I couldn't shake an unspoken tension that curled in my chest. "Are you all right, Henry?" asked Margaret, my fiancée, her gloved hand slipping into mine. Her dark eyes searched mine, concerned. I forced a smile. "Just a bit of pre-voyage nerves, I suppose." She laughed softly. "It's just a short trip. What could possibly go wrong?" The words lingered in my mind, hauntingly prescient, though I didn't know it then. We boarded early, eager to secure a good spot near the rail. By the time the last passenger climbed aboard, the Eastland was packed well beyond capacity, nearly 2,500 souls. As we pulled away from the dock, the ship tilted slightly to port, then back to starboard. A harmless sway, or so I told myself. The moments that followed unfolded in a blur. Just minutes after departure, the Eastland began to list alarmingly to port. Cups and bottles slid from tables, passengers clutched at railings. A murmur rippled through the crowd, growing into a crescendo of panic as the tilt became steeper. "Henry, what's happening?" Margaret's voice was tight with fear. "Hold on to me," I said, pulling her close. The ship shuddered violently, as though groaning under the weight of its passengers. Then, with a sickening lurch, it tipped onto its side, throwing us into chaos. The icy waters of the Chicago River rushed up to meet us. I hit the surface hard, the shock of cold stealing my breath. Around me, people screamed and flailed, their Sunday best turning into leaden weights in the water. I searched desperately for Margaret, my heart pounding louder than the cacophony around me. "Margaret!" I shouted, gulping air before plunging beneath the surface again. The murky water stung my eyes as I swam through the wreckage. Overturned tables, floating hats, the ghostly outline of the ship's hull. I broke the surface again, coughing and gasping, and there she was, clinging to a piece of debris. "I'm here," she called, her voice trembling but strong. Relief flooded through me as I reached her side. We clung to the makeshift raft together, shivering as we watched the horrifying scene unfold. Rescue boats arrived swiftly, their crews pulling survivors from the water. It felt like hours before Margaret and I were hauled aboard, though it could have been minutes. We sat wrapped in blankets, our teeth chattering as we watched the Eastland lying on its side in the river, half submerged and utterly defeated. The cries of the trapped and the grieving echoed across the water. The aftermath was a blur of faces and questions. Over 800 lives were lost that day, a tragedy born of negligence and hubris. The ship that was meant to carry joy had instead delivered sorrow, its name etched into history for all the wrong reasons. That night, as Margaret and I lay side by side on makeshift cots in a shelter, I couldn't close my eyes. The sounds of the river haunted me, the images of the day replaying endlessly. But Margaret's hand in mine anchored me to the present, a reminder of what I still had. The Eastland taught me a cruel lesson about the fragility of life, but it also revealed the unyielding strength of the human spirit. Even in the face of unspeakable tragedy, we endure. And as the sun rose the next morning, casting light over a city in mourning, I resolved to carry that lesson with me always. Here's a strictly factual account of the SS Eastland disaster. The SS Eastland disaster occurred on July 24, 1915, in the Chicago River. The ship was carrying passengers from the Western Electric Company for a company picnic to be held in Michigan City, Indiana. Designed as a speedy passenger ship, the Eastland had a history of stability issues, exacerbated by modifications that made it top-heavy, including the addition of lifeboats to comply with new safety regulations after the sinking of the Titanic in 1912. On the morning of the disaster, the Eastland was docked at the Clark Street Bridge in downtown Chicago. As passengers boarded, the ship's instability became apparent. It listed several times before capsizing completely whilst still tied to the dock. The incident happened so quickly that many passengers were trapped below decks and unable to escape. The tragedy claimed 844 lives, making it one of the worst maritime disasters in U.S. history. The majority of victims were women and children. Investigations revealed that the ship's design flaws, coupled with overcrowding, were primary factors in the disaster. Legal battles ensued, but no one was ultimately held accountable for the loss of life. Today, the Eastland tragedy is remembered through memorials and educational efforts, serving as a somber reminder of the consequences of negligence and the importance of maritime safety. The ocean spread endlessly in all directions, a deep sapphire expanse glittering under the May sun. The RMS Lusitania sliced through the water with elegant precision, its 4 towering smokestacks casting long shadows on the waves. I leaned against the rail, inhaling the salt-laden air, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of the Atlantic. It was May 7th, 1915, and we were nearing the Irish coast, bound for Liverpool. The passengers aboard were a lively mix: families on holiday, businessmen discussing deals, and a handful of soldiers on leave. Despite the shadow of war looming over Europe, the Lusitania felt like a sanctuary, its grand halls and luxurious cabins a world away from the trenches. But beneath the veneer of calm, tension lingered, unspoken yet palpable. I glanced at Mary, my younger sister, as she sketched in her notebook. Her auburn hair glowed in the sunlight, and her brow furrowed in concentration. "What are you drawing now?" I asked, leaning over her shoulder. "Just the sea," she said with a small smile. "It feels endless, doesn't it?" "It does." I nodded, though a pang of unease rippled through me. The war had made the sea dangerous, even for a ship as majestic as the Lusitania. Still, it seemed impossible that anything could threaten us here, under this vast and open sky. The illusion of safety shattered just after lunch. I was standing near the rail, lost in thought, when the first cry went up. "Torpedo!" someone shouted. I turned sharply, just in time to see a trail of bubbles racing toward the ship's starboard side. A thunderous explosion followed, rocking the vessel with terrifying force. Smoke and debris filled the air, and the ship began to list immediately. Panic erupted. Passengers screamed and ran in every direction, clutching children and life jackets. I fought my way through the chaos, searching desperately for Mary. The deck tilted further, and I stumbled, grabbing onto a railing for support. "Mary!" I called, my voice barely audible over the cacophony. I found her near the stern, clutching her sketchbook as if it were a lifeline. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. "We have to go," I said, taking her hand. "The lifeboats," she said, glancing around. We joined the throng of passengers making their way to the lifeboats, but it was chaos. The listing of the ship made launching them almost impossible, and many overturned before they even hit the water. The crew did their best to maintain order, but fear had taken hold. "Jump," I said, gripping Mary's shoulders as we reached the edge of the deck. Her eyes widened. "What? We have no choice." I squeezed her hand tightly. On 3, 1, 2, the icy Atlantic swallowed us whole. The cold was a brutal shock, knocking the breath from my lungs. I surfaced, gasping, and turned frantically until I saw Mary nearby, clinging to a piece of debris. I swam to her, the salt water stinging my eyes and throat. Around us, the scene was harrowing. The Lusitania was sinking rapidly, her bow disappearing beneath the waves. People clung to whatever they could find, their cries of terror and despair echoing across the water. I held on to Mary and the fragment of wreckage, focusing on keeping her afloat. It felt like an eternity before the first rescue boats arrived. By then, the Lusitania had vanished entirely, leaving behind a field of debris and survivors scattered across the water. We were pulled aboard one of the boats, shivering and silent, too numb to comprehend what had happened. The journey to Queenstown was somber. Over 100 lives were lost that day, victims of a merciless war and the unforgiving sea. As Mary and I sat huddled together, I realized how fragile life truly was and how easily it could be taken away. Factual account of the RMS Lusitania disaster. The RMS Lusitania was a British ocean liner operated by the Cunard Line. On May 7, 1915, during World War I, it was torpedoed by the German U-boat U-20 off the southern coast of Ireland. The ship sank in just 18 minutes, leading to the deaths of 1,198 passengers and crew, including 128 Americans. The Lusitania was known for its speed and luxury, but its role in the war effort made it a target. It was later revealed that the ship was carrying munitions, which may have contributed to the secondary explosions after the torpedo impact. The attack caused international outrage and was a factor in the United States' eventual entry into the war. Of the approximately 960 people aboard, only 761 survived. The disaster remains one of the most infamous maritime tragedies in history, highlighting the human cost of war and the dangers of civilian vessels in conflict zones. Memorials and historical records continue to honor those who lost their lives and serve as a reminder of the perils of wartime navigation. The North Atlantic stretched before us, a vast and quiet expanse, the stars above mirrored in the calm sea. The RMS Titanic was an unshakable marvel, her grandeur unmatched as she steamed steadily toward New York. It was April 14, 1912, and the icy night carried a strange stillness that felt at odds with the bustling life on board. I strolled along the promenade deck, the cold air biting at my cheeks. Around me, other passengers were taking in the night or chatting softly, their laughter punctuating the silence. Inside, the first-class lounge glittered with warm light, the hum of conversation and music spilling out through the windows. It was hard to imagine anything but smooth sailing ahead. "Evelyn, come inside before you freeze," my friend Charlotte called, her gloved hand beckoning from the doorway. Her eyes sparkled, though whether from champagne or sheer delight I couldn't tell. "Just a moment," I replied, gazing once more at the stars. They seemed closer tonight, their light sharp and unwavering. It was almost as if they were watching us. I rejoined Charlotte in the lounge, where the warmth and opulence enveloped me like a cocoon. The chatter was lively, the orchestra's strings weaving melodies into the air. It was a world apart from the icy deck, from the dark sea beyond. And then came the jolt, a faint shudder that ran through the ship so subtle that most people barely noticed. I looked up sharply, my heart quickening. "What was that?" I asked, but no one around me seemed concerned. "Probably nothing," Charlotte said, though her brow furrowed. "The Titanic is unsinkable, remember?" The reassurance felt hollow, but I pushed the thought aside. Minutes passed, then a steward entered, his face pale but composed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "please proceed to the upper deck with your life vests as a precaution." The mood shifted instantly. Laughter died, replaced by murmurs of confusion and concern. We followed the crowd to the deck, where the cold air bit harder than before. Crew members moved briskly, lowering lifeboats and directing passengers. The Titanic's bow was already dipping into the water. "Charlotte, stay close to me," I said, gripping her arm. The enormity of what was happening began to sink in as the ship listed further. The unsinkable Titanic was sinking. We found ourselves on the starboard side where the crew urged women and children into the lifeboats. Charlotte was pushed forward, but I hesitated. My place was here, with the others still on board, wasn't it? But she grabbed my hand, pulling me into the lifeboat with her. The descent was harrowing, the cries from above mingling with the icy spray. From the water, we watched in stunned silence as the Titanic's stern lifted high into the sky, the lights flickering out one by one. The sound of the ship breaking apart was deafening, a roar that seemed to split the heavens. The night stretched on, the cold seeping into our bones as we huddled together in the lifeboat. Around us, voices called out in the darkness, fading one by one. The stars, so bright and eternal, offered no comfort. When dawn finally broke, we were rescued by the RMS Carpathia. As we climbed aboard, my legs trembled beneath me. I turned back for one last look at the horizon, where the Titanic had vanished. It seemed impossible that such a grand ship, filled with life and promise, could be gone. Factual account of the RMS Titanic disaster. The RMS Titanic was a British passenger liner and the largest ship afloat at the time of her maiden voyage. On April 14, 1912, she struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic and sank in the early hours of April 15th. Of the 2,240 passengers and crew aboard, more than 1,500 lost their lives, making it one of the deadliest peacetime maritime disasters in history. The Titanic was considered a marvel of engineering, with advanced safety features and luxurious accommodations. However, her limited number of lifeboats, enough for only about half of those aboard, proved catastrophic. The ship's sinking was compounded by a series of misjudgments, including excessive speed in iceberg-laden waters and inadequate evacuation procedures. The disaster prompted significant changes in maritime safety regulations, including the requirement for sufficient lifeboats for all passengers and the establishment of the International Ice Patrol. The Titanic story continues to captivate the public, serving as a poignant reminder of human hubris and the fragility of life.